we jump into Star Trek The Next Generation. First episode of The Next Generation. This one, I'm going to make it one episode for the syndicated two-part episode. They split it up into two parts, but originally aired as one episode. Well, I'll do it as one. It's Encounter at Farpoint. And this was horrible. Horrible. The absolute dirt worst. It was terrible. A steaming pile of garbage that they buried underneath a steaming pile of garbage and then dropped another pile of garbage on top of it. It was probably worse than that, but I can't think of anything worse. I know they were fleshing out ideas and characters and didn't have things totally in mind when they filmed it, but it was bad. Bad. Well, they start off, Captain Picard's aboard the new Galaxy-class Enterprise. And he's inspecting things, getting to know his new shipmates, getting to know his crew. And they're headed to the planet Bindi to inspect this Farpoint station that was built. There's some sort of mystery going on. Starfleet doesn't know what it is. So Picard's like, well, have to snoop. And Data's like, what's that mean? Picard's like, how could you not know a simple word like snoop? Data says, well, maybe it's something I wasn't taught to emulate, unlike, and then he names half a dozen other words that he should have not known if he didn't know what snoop meant, including gumshoe. That happened. They're heading along when all of a sudden this big electronic fence shows up in space. And they don't have everything just so. People start reacting to things before Picard says anything. Red alert happens. Picard hadn't ordered red alert. He gets mad that there's a red alert, orders him down to yellow alert, and then reacts as if they're at red alert. They stop the ship. He doesn't know what to do, and all of a sudden, Q shows up. Picard's like, who are you on my bridge? And Q's like, I'm from the Continuum, so you can call me Q. Then he tells Picard he's there because he doesn't think humans should be that deep into space, wants him to go home to Earth. Calls him a savage race. Picard's like, well, that's not true. And Q's like, well, maybe if I wear this uniform. And he wears like a World War II uniform. And he starts talking in 1940 slang. Picard's like, we don't act like that anymore. We haven't in 400 years. And Q's like, what about this uniform? And he wears like some mid-21st century supposed uniform after an atomic age. And Picard's like, still no dice. We're not savage. Q's like, yes you are. Picard's like, well, you can't put us on trial and judge us. And Q's like, that's a great idea. And he does that. He does that. And Q had already frozen a bridge officer. We never saw him in the entire rest of the series, but he was in flashbacks constantly when he was frozen. They get to this trial and it's some sort of recreation of mid-21st century. It looked really bizarre. Really bizarre. Q was the judge. He promised to be fair. Tasha beats up a guy that has a machine gun as a hand. He doesn't just shoot her, he just lets himself get beat up. She was unarmed. Q ends up freezing Tasha Yar, and they're like, oh no, we don't have a sick bay to freeze her like the other guy. And then Q's like, oh okay, and he just unfreezes her and she's fine. He puts him on this trial. Picard refuses to accept it, and finally he does. They go back to the ship. And Picard's like, let's get out of here. We'll separate the saucer section. No reason as to why they would separate the saucer section. They just do. They show the families and all the lower grade officers going to the saucer section for separation at warp, which had never been done before apparently, but they do it. Picard goes to the battle bridge. We see the unnamed Chief O'Brien. He was just a con officer at that point. This goes on for some time. But on planet Bindi, Riker goes into the Farpoint station, meets Gorn. He's like the leader of the station. Warren's like, would you like a snack? And Riker's like, no, because you don't have apples. And then apples suddenly are there. And he's like, aha, apples. And he's like, you sure there's nothing you want to tell me? And he's like, nope. And Riker's like, okay, goodbye. Then you see Riker meet up with Dr. Crusher and her son. And they're walking through this open-air mall. And Crusher's like, well, I don't want to investigate anything because I'm not a bridge officer, so ha. And Riker's like, bunch of strange things happening. And she's like, don't care. She's like, if only there is gold on this red fabric, then I would buy the whole thing. And then it gold ears. And she's like, okay, I'll take it all. Charge it. Then she leaves with her son. And LaForge shows up. And Riker's like, is this an official report? And LaForge's like, oh yeah. And he gives him the report that he's ready to be beamed up to the Enterprise. Well, Riker beams up, reports to Picard. Picard's just like nonchalant. Watch the TV over there to see the highlight package of Q. And the saucer section is reported to be an hour away. In a minute and a half, the saucer section arrives. After Riker's watched the highlight package, Picard's like, manually dock the ship. Riker's like, okay, and he does. They say with no automation, but it was completely automated. Completely. And Riker didn't do anything except give the orders. The rest of the crew actually did the work. So it wasn't really Riker doing it. So Riker takes a party down. Well, actually, first he goes to the holodeck to find Data. And Data's in the holodeck in this wooded area trying to get the whistling right for Pop Goes the Weasel. Riker's like, I checked out your service record. And then he had no clue about Data's service record. In the same breath, Data had to correct him. Didn't know the basics of Data. And he's like, well, you're going on the away team with me. And then when they get out in the hallway with Wesley Crusher, who almost drowned in the wooded area when he fell in the water, they get out there and Riker's like, I talked Data into going on the away mission like he had a choice. He didn't. He was ordered. Picard not happy with Wesley because he's dripping on everything. Then Wesley wants to go to the bridge. And his mom's like, no, you can't do that. And he's like, what if I stay in the turbo lift? She's like, okay. So they do that. Picard gets mad that Wesley's there. And then Dr. Crusher's like, you met him when he was 5. When you took my husband's body back to us. And Picard's like, oh yeah, come on the bridge and take a look around. Wesley already knew all the controls. Then a perimeter alert happened, which never happened before or since. Just an automatic alert. Wesley's like, you got a perimeter alert. And Picard's like, get off my bridge. And he's like, but he knew what it was and you didn't. They find out that some alien ship is coming. It starts firing at the planet, wrecking the Farpoint station. And so, after that, Riker goes back down to the planet. They check out some tunnels. Troy senses some things, really vaguely, which he is known to do. Then they run into Q again, and he's like, you'll never figure this out. And they're like, oh yeah, watch this. And then Riker takes the team over to the alien ship. He's like, I sense different things now. They get beamed back over. Q's like, you'll never figure it out. And they're like, oh, that is a living being. And the guy from the station trapped its mate on the planet and forced it to do its bidding. And naturally, it works the same as our transporter. Which made no sense, but that's what they went with. And then Q's like, okay, I'll leave now, but I won't promise not to come back later. Picard's like, okay. And then they continue on their way. Horrible episode. Horrible. Bunch of scenes thrown together in this one to pad out the time, and because they didn't know what they were doing when they wrote it, they had to throw in random shots of the engine room where there was no dialogue because the studio said they would not build an engine room unless an engine room was included in the pilot, so they had to write in scenes where people just walked around the engine room. No dialogue. Then Gene Roddenberry had lunch with DeForest Kelley. He's like, I guess you wouldn't want to be in the pilot of The Next Generation. And D. Kelly's like, sure I would, let's do it. So they wrote a scene where he was walking with Data to go to the shuttle craft because he didn't like the transporters. And he put that in there. No bearing at all on the episode at all. Picard was going to transfer Crusher off the ship for no reason. She's like, I want to stay. And he's like, oh, well, in that case, in the middle of an emergency, just random dialogue. They were just patting it out. You also saw a bunch of the uniforms that had kilts and short dresses. And they never showed those ever again. Just in the pilot, people had kilts. Horrible, horrible episode. But pretty much I was Encounter at Farpoint.